Well, good evening and a very warm welcome on behalf of Milim to this evening's presentation, and apologies for the silent movie you just sat through. We normally have some music, but something happened tonight, I don't know. So welcome wherever you are in the UK and wherever you may be in the world. Our series of online talks and conversations continues with our guest, John Jay. I'll introduce John to you in just a moment. This is the talk that was originally scheduled for the 7th of July. Some of you will remember we had to abandon it for technical reasons. So let's hope we get through tonight without incident. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. Please do ask questions. You can do this by typing whatever you would like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen. And as ever, we will do our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. You also have a chat facility, and this allows you to send a message if you wish to all of the other participants on this webinar. We are recording this event and it will appear on our website, milim.org.uk, in the next couple of days. There you will find recordings of other past events as well as details of our future programme for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest, John Jay is an author and journalist, best known as a former managing editor for business news at the Sunday Times. He studied modern history at Magdalen College, Oxford, began his career in journalism at the Western Mail in Cardiff, and went on to hold several senior roles in business news. John now works in fund management and is currently development partner at Brompton Asset Management. In 1989, he published The New Tycoons with Judy Bevan, who is now his wife. This book looked at the rising stars of the private equity industry. His second book, Facing Fearful Odds, My Father's Story of Captivity, Escape and Resistance, 1940 to 1945, was published just over 10 years ago. And this book examined the wartime experiences of his father, who was captured by the Germans. His most recent book is this one, Ninette's War, which he's going to tell us all about this evening. John, a very warm welcome to Milim. We're excited to hear what you've got to say. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Good evening, everyone. I'll just share my presentation. Jonathan, is that visible to all and sundry?
Perfect, absolutely perfect.
Okay. First of all, many thanks to Jonathan and to Alan for inviting me to speak, and thank you all for joining me on this little journey as I tell you about Ninette's War. I've got a few slides that I hope will help to illustrate the story as I go along. Why did the story attract me in the first place? I was at a Gerald Ronson charity luncheon quite a few years ago, and Gerald had put next to me the Dowager Lady Swathling as she introduced herself. And I was writing the story about my father, and she started to tell me her story. And it struck me that there was an extraordinary arc to this story. She began her life in very comfortable circumstances, and yet the whole world fell in on her when the Germans invaded France in 1940. And she had to go into hiding under false identity, and then escaped over the Pyrenees to safety in Spain, when all around her, cousins, aunts, uncles were being arrested, deported, and killed in Auschwitz or other camps. And yet, from this young teenager who was crawling through the mud of the Pyrenees to safety in Spain, she ended up being wooed by the elder son of a British peer, and thus she ended her life as the Dowager Lady Swathling, lady in waiting to Princess Alexandra. As you can see in the pictures here, there is Ninette at David Montagu's ennoblement in 1990 when he succeeded to the title of his late father. And you can also see her there portrayed by Leonard Bowden, who was the royal portraitist who did the Queen, our late Queen, as well as the Duke of Edinburgh and a number of other members of the royal family. The starting point for me was that Ninette gave me her wartime diaries. Now, for the avoidance of doubt, they aren't Anne Frank of Anne Frank's quality or insight, intellectual caliber, because she was younger than Anne Frank. But they were a very good starting point to reconstruct her wartime experiences. And she grew up in a magnificent townhouse in the 19th arrondissement. It was the house that had previously been lived in by Debussy with his Jewish wife Emma Bardak, and next door Arthur Rubinstein lived. And so Ninette would play in her garden with her older sister, listening to the sound of Arthur Rubinstein practicing the piano. So it was a real silver spoon upbringing. And you can see that some diary entries. Don't worry, I'm not going to read you every single word that are in these diary entries, but it's fascinating that the very first entry in her diary is for the 3rd of September 1939. And it just reads, at 11 o'clock, the newscaster announced war between England and Germany. And at 5 o'clock, which was a funny feeling, France was at war. It was very moving. And interestingly enough, the next diary entry is from the 10th of May 1940, when something else quite interesting happened. She writes, I haven't written in my diary for a long time, but I felt too lazy. Today, everyone is profoundly upset. Holland is invaded and Belgium has declared war on Germany at 3 o'clock in the morning. And she writes, she also does little pen and ink drawings, as you can see from the right-hand side. And one of them is indeed of a dogfight, one plane attacking another, and she mimics the sounds of the aero engines. So that was the starting point for my journey with Ninette. Many years talking to her, but backing up everything she said as far as possible with research. Primary research, interviewing other people, reading memoirs, sitting in archives, digging out documents, some of which Ninette had not seen, about her own family. And the family, as the Germans headed towards Paris, were in the exode, the exodus. This was the biggest movement of people in Western Europe ever. Millions and millions of people took to the roads. And Ninette's cousin, Louis Dreyfus, was the senator of the Alpes-Maritimes. And thus they were in the government convoy for some of the time. And you can see this incredible long journey down through the Loire, where the government initially based itself, and then down to Bordeaux as the Germans advanced. And it was at Bordeaux that Pétain took over. And then the family continued their journey on to Perpignan, which was the point at which the armistice was declared. And then they settled in Marseille initially, where the southern branch of the family company, the Louis Dreyfus Company, was based, because Ninette was the great-granddaughter of the original Louis Dreyfus, and her father was chief executive of the Louis Dreyfus Bank. But then Pétain threw all of the Jews out of their banking jobs, and so the family moved to Cannes in the Alpes-Maritimes, because there were a number of family members there, because Louis Dreyfus had been a senator of the Alpes-Maritimes. I mentioned the importance of backing up Ninette's diary with other research, because memory can be a very frail source for people writing factual books, because people tend to see events through the prism of subsequent events. And I include this slide for a couple of reasons. You can see here on the top left one of the most notorious photographs of the Second World War, which is Pétain after the armistice, a few months after the armistice, meeting Hitler at Montoire-sur-le-Loire in October 1940, and shaking hands as fellow veterans. But still, Frenchmen thought he would be the shield, including many Jews. And thus, when Pétain made a royal progress, a sort of quasi-royal progress through the southern zone in December 1940, Jews were amongst the crowd, were in the crowds turning out to cheer him. And Ninette and her family watched the parade from Pétain's, watched his car going by down the Canebière, from their hotel bedrooms in the Hotel Louvre Paix. And there's a photograph of Ninette with her older sister, Viviane. But it very soon became clear that Pétain was not a shield. And this, on the bottom left, you can see a fascinating poster for his so-called Révolution Nationale. And you've got the old France on the left-hand side, and his supposed new France of goodbye, liberty, fraternity, and equality, and hello, work, the family, and the fatherland. But what is the old anti-France that he was against? You can see the Star of David on the top left, with a Masonic symbol inside, and underneath the foundations of France is being destroyed by capital, by Juiverie, by Freemasonry, in amongst communism, etc. So it's the classic anti-Semitic trope of Jews are both capitalists and communists out to destroy Christian France. So this next slide tells the story of how hate speech turns it into hate activity, and just the sheer persistence of anti-Semitic cartoons, depictions. So if you look at the top left, you will see a magazine called La Libre Parole, which of course means free speech. And this is one of the great issues. How much should there be free speech if that includes hate speech? And that was the magazine of a man called Edouard Drumont, and that's from 1893. And you roll the tape forward to the interwar period, and you've got a magazine called France in Chains, and it's the organization is the Union Against Jews, and this hate speech was extraordinary. So there was a man called Louis Darquier who was sentenced to prison and fined for an anti-Semitic article in La France in chains in June 1939, and he only avoided prison by being called up for the outbreak of war. And just an example, as a Darquier pre-war quote, he declared that all Jews, half Jews, quarter Jews, and bastards of Jews and servants of Jews were objects of his hatred. And the response of the Republican government was to introduce anti-race hate legislation. So you can see a newspaper headline, "Racism Muzzled." What is interesting is that one of the first measures of Pétain when he assumed power was to get rid of the anti-hate speech legislation. And it was the starting gun for the most extraordinary outbursts of anti-Semitic newspaper coverage. And at the top left is a newspaper article directly attacking Ninette's family business. And you've got a photograph of the Banque Louis Dreyfus where her father was chief executive. And you can see the end of a headline saying France is colonized by Jews. And there's a little subhead saying to purify the race. And once, with Pétain having got rid of hate speech, he then put in power the hate speakers. So I've mentioned Louis Dacier. You can see a picture of him in the middle there. The previous head of his body designed to expropriate and marginalize Jews was a man called Xavier Vallat, who was a pre-war MP, and he said attacked Leon Blum, who was of course France's first Jewish prime minister, saying that it was, quote, unbecoming for France to be ruled by a member of a people suffering from, quotes, a divine curse, condemning them to have no country of their own. And that is the person that Pétain put in charge of introducing discriminatory legislation. The article on the top right is written by a man called Henry Coston, who was one of the leading anti-Semitic journalists. And when Louis Dreyfus died in a carriage accident in November 1940, Henry Coston produced the ugliest obituary. It appeared in the newspaper Paris Soir. And he wrote that Louis was a billionaire whose business practices caused starvation. The article was headed "Enemy Public Number One of the French Farmer." And the strapline was "The Jew Louis Dreyfus, who never did anything other than for a high price, has just died." So a few months after Louis Dreyfus died, the Pétain organized and his ministers organized an exhibition, a traveling exhibition, but it started off in Paris, called "The Jew and France." And if you look at the imagery, it is virtually identical imagery to the Edouard Druma back in 1893 in the top left. And alongside that exhibition was a film called Le Péril Juif, which had been developed by Goebbels and was translated and shown throughout France, not only in the occupied zone, but in the non-occupied zone. And here's an example of the narration. "The Jew is like a rat. Like rats, the Jew is a coward. He is sly and cruel. He feels the irresistible need to destroy. The Jews' power lies in their superior numbers and like proliferating rats, they're a danger to human health. So that was the staple diet for French cinema goers in the, as I say, in the supposedly free zone, as well as in the zone occupied by the Germans. And of course, what happens with a surfeit of hate speech? It turns into hate violence. And it was, and at the bottom left, you can see one of the French synagogues bombed by Frenchmen, supplied by the SS across France in 1941. And then you can see another image of the French police running concentration camps. And you can also see French police rounding up Jews for deportation in Marseille in 1943, aiding and abetting the Germans in their activities. So the next slide is, well, at the top left is shows just how far low people can sink, because this is a picture of René Bousquet, who was the head of the police under Vichy, operating throughout France, occupied and non-occupied, with the SS during that January 1943 roundup, where Germans were assisted by French police from the previous slide. And just look at the smile on his face as he associates with an SS major called Greece during that roundup, in which 1,650 Jews were deported, including to Sobibor. Greece survived the war, serving only 6 years in a Yugoslav prison for war crimes. Bousquet went virtually unpunished, was protected by François Mitterrand, had his Légion d'honneur restored, and was pardoned. Only in the late 1980s did his past catch up with him, and he was put on trial, but he was assassinated while he was being investigated for crimes against humanity. And Bousquet, you can see a document below. Don't worry, you don't have to try and read it. Bousquet's colleagues launched an investigation into Ninette's father. And this was a document I found in the Archives Nationales that Ninette wasn't even aware of. And what it says, and he had been denounced. He'd been denounced, and denunciation was rife in France during the Second World War. Gentiles denouncing Jews if they were in hiding or under false papers, telling the French paramilitary police, the police, telling the Germans where these Jews in hiding lived, or telling the civil authorities that they supposedly had committed crimes. And Edgar was denounced in a letter saying that he did not have the stamp juif in his passport. Now, in the occupied zone, the Jews had to wear the yellow star. In the non-occupied zone, even after the Germans occupied it in November 1942, they only had to have the word juif in their papers. And Edgar refused. And so they opened a file on him in January 1943, shortly after the Juif stamp law was introduced. And what is so fascinating is just how bad was the research into Ninette's father by the anti-Jewish police. Which is also a worrying sign, because people can be arrested on the basis of completely wrong information. So Edgar, in this document, was supposedly born in Alsace in 1883. His father had been born in the Crimea. He lived in Boulogne-sur-Seine. Ninette was a boy. So the reality is that Edgar had been born in Zurich. He'd been naturalized. His father had been born in Switzerland, and he lived in the 16th arrondissement. But anyway, the document drips on with regard to his business interest with anti-Semitic poison. Edgar, as I mentioned earlier, was the cousin of Louis Dreyfus, who in this document quotes controlled the European grain market. And Edgar's lifestyle was, quotes, very grand and luxurious, suggesting his resources are very significant. And they also, the document says, tries to quote, tries to delve into his political attitudes to discover any, quotes, political activity which was a euphemism for resistance. And the report conclusion was that Edgar, despite a very grand lifestyle, claims not to have any income other than state savings, and therefore the police called for what was called a provisional administrator to take charge of his personal wealth. And the local public prosecutor was told to launch criminal proceedings over the lack of Juif stamp, of the Juif stamp. So at this point, Edgar did agree that he should have the Juif stamp put in his papers. And this next slide, I have the ID papers both for Ninette's mother and Ninette herself. And you can see that he finally gave in June 1943 and agreed that the family should have the word Juif stamped in their passports. It was then the family had to consider what would happen if the Germans, who had by then occupied most of southern France, occupied the southeast of France, which at that point was occupied by the Italians. And they had to prepare, and they organized false papers. And I'm lucky enough to have, courtesy of Ninette, some of these false papers. And they were created by one of Edgar's former colleagues, a man called Roger Appel, who was the master forger, one of the master forgers of the Riviera. Literally hundreds and hundreds of Jews were saved by his forgeries. And here you can see what examples of how false papers were created and why there were particular things in the false papers. So one of the things you needed was to have easy to remember Aryan aliases that were close to your real name, perhaps started with the same letter, the same number of syllables, and you had easy to remember false birthdays and a false address. So if we start with Edgar, Edgar had as a name, has a Germanic feel, and Ninette was a nickname. So Edgar and Ninette, his daughter, became Edouard, and Edgar became Edouard, and Ninette became Nadine, and Delmas was chosen. Delmar was chosen as the surname, meaning someone essentially from a farm. So Edgar Dreyfus, the foreign-born, French nationalized Swiss banker, born on the 28th of August 1882 in Reisbach in Switzerland, with Juif in his ID card, became Edouard Delmar, Aryan industrialist, born on the 28th of June 1882 in Lille with French nationality, address 33 Allée Léon Gambetta, Marseille, which the family knew from their stay in Marseille. And Yvonne became Madame Delmas with a false birthday. And what's interesting, the two girls had the place of birth stated as Valenciennes. And there was a very good reason for that. And you can see a suggestion of that from the photograph at the bottom right of the slide, because the Valenciennes Town Hall records have been destroyed by a fire during the Battle of France in 1940, with only the 17th century facade standing. So if a French policeman or milician or German wanted to check up on the family's false papers, the children's false papers, they would find that the records were destroyed. And interestingly enough, a couple of Rothschild girls did exactly the same thing. Not Valenciennes, but their false papers were from another town hall that had been destroyed. The ration cards are signed by a man called Paul Mira, and he was apparently loyal mayor to Pétain of Meilhan near Pau, where the family went into hiding. And as I've learned from my researchers, Mira helped Allied airmen escape France over the Pyrenees, and Jews such as Ninette's cousin Pierre-Louis Dreyfus to cross the Pyrenees to safety. What were the consequences of not succeeding in going into hiding? This is at the top left, you'll see an entry from Ninette's diary from the 4th of August 1943, and in it says that Bertine came to lunch with Aunt Alice, Maryse, and Denise, and then there's a subsequent entry without a date, but it's in September 1943, and it says Maryse has joined Bertine, Tony Gaillard, and Giselle G. And this is code for the fact that her cousin Maryse Schoenfeld and Maryse's husband André have been arrested and taken to Drancy. But André had been in Drancy for quite some time, and as a holder of the Légion d'honneur, a senior veteran soldier, and a senior industrialist, he was part of the inmate management team looking after various activities in the Drancy concentration camp. And you can see in that organogram on the top right, under pain, under bread, you can see André's name. And he'd been arrested in the original big roundup of prominent French Jews in Paris in December 1941. And he was an invalid from the First World War. If you look at the photograph of him at the bottom left-hand side of the slide, you can see a slightly misshapen left leg, and it is actually a prosthetic. And but the Germans still insisted on arresting him. And in 1943, they said, well, we're going to deport you. You can say goodbye to your wife. So he was taken under armed guard to say goodbye to his wife, Maryse, and she was immediately arrested, and they were both deported on the 2nd of September 1943. And you can see the Germans, of course, were immaculate record keepers, and they kept lists of all the people they deported from Drancy. And you can see André and Marie, as she's called, Schoenfeld, there in the list and in the middle of the right hand of the slide. Ninette's Aunt Alice was not arrested at that point, and Maryse and André's daughter Denise fled down the backstairs when the Germans came and sought refuge with the Jesuits, and was looked after by the Jesuits for the rest of the war. But at the end of, finally, the Germans came for Tante Alice and deported her on the very last mass transport out of Paris on the 31st of July, 1944. Just imagine, General Patton's tanks are surging through Brittany. We're just days away. We're 4 weeks away from de Gaulle marching in triumph down the Champs-Élysées. But the SS are still busily deporting every single child and elderly person that they can find, emptying the orphanages, etc. So that list, Convoy 77 list, Tante Alice, you'll see there as Alice Levy, born in Zurich, a neutral country, in June 1874. She's 70 years old. There's a man, Benoit Levy, he's 87. Lucien Léon, 3 weeks short of his 84th birthday. Antonia Levy, 78. Louis Levy, 68. Brunette Levy, 71. But alongside little Anna Levy, born in Marseille in August 1930, so not yet 14. That was their hunger to deport old age pensioners, to deport children. One of the questions that one needs to ask oneself is, what makes a survivor, or what makes a victim? Obviously, social capital is important for false IDs, for hiding in plain sight, for Gentile neighbors who will look after one, etc., Gentile connections. A Gentile policeman warned Ninette's cousin, Jean Reims, that he was about to be arrested, and thus he left the country. But sometimes it's judgment, it's luck as well as judgment is the deciding factor. And this is a slide of victims from very, very prominent families, but it did not have the judgment or did not have the luck to survive. So there in the top left is Ninette's uncle, Jacques Lovenbach, who was a director of Saint-Gobain, very, very prominent industrialist, who was betrayed and deported alongside a little girl called Suzanne, and you can see a photograph of her, an orphan. Beneath, you've got, in particular, the most prominent lay Jews, a man called Pierre Masse, who was a senator, arrested at the same time as André. And you've also got Jacques Heilbronner, who was he was the senior lay Jew in France, and supposedly Pétain was his friend. He'd even been Pétain's mentor during the First World War, member of the Council of State. And at a certain point, the Germans came for him. And then you've got the Reinachs. You've got Beatrice Reinach, who was born a commando. She had converted to Catholicism, was so convinced that that would save her. She would go riding in the Bois de Boulogne on her horse with her daughter Fanny, who you can see just diagonally below her, and she would wear her yellow star on her riding jacket, would discuss events of the day with German officers exercising their horses. But at a certain point, the Germans came for her and her estranged husband Léon and her son Bertrand and her daughter Fanny all perished in Auschwitz. And then Ninette's, the Cohn family, Armand Cohn, who was left in charge of the Rothschild Hospital and tried to appease the Germans. At a certain point, the Rothschild Hospital had inmates from Drancy, including André Schoenfeld, Ninette's cousin. And he even agreed to have a barbed wire put up round the hospital and to have guards posted, security guards posted outside. And he thought he by this appeasement would render him safe. But in early August, the middle of August 1944, just days before de Gaulle arrived in Paris, there was a last transport, a small transport of prominent people, including Armand Cohn and his family. And you can see the children down below on the left-hand side, including Ninette's childhood friend, Philippe Cohn, who survived the war. But the terrible, terrible, sad story concerns the little boy on the far left, Georges André, who the Germans conducted medical experiments on in Auschwitz. And then as the Allies approached a separate camp to which the children had been taken, all the children on whom they'd practiced medical experiments were killed so that they couldn't bear witness to what had happened to them. That penultimate slide is about Gentile rescue. You know, what makes a rescuer? And there is a number of people here that are interesting. Top left is Ninette's school teacher in Cannes, who practiced apparent loyalty to the the Vichy regime, but was part of a resistance cell and would coach Ninette on her need to keep calm and in the face of all the anti-Semitic abuse to which she was subjected to by both classmates and teachers. And then you've got a man called Lo Spinoso, who was the Italian race police head installed in the Riviera, who defied the Germans and protected Jews. And you've got Bishop Raymond of Nice, who hid Jews and gave them false identities. And amongst the various other people here, the family cook of Jacques Lavenbach hid Jacques' daughter, Manon, Ninette's cousin, in a pigsty to keep her in safety, and then took her to Ninette's hideaway in the Pyrenees, and thus Manon went over the Pyrenees in safety to Spain, and like Ninette, married an Englishman, in Manon's case, Jock Makata, and thus became part of the extended Makata clan. And then in the middle row, you've got the people that looked after Ninette in the Pyrenees when they hid with false papers, the Baths, Pierre Bath and his wife Madeleine, and Paul Mirat, who I mentioned earlier. And that and lastly, you've got Henri Deliart, who was the smuggler that helped Ninette to safety over the Pyrenees. And the smugglers of the Pyrenees were very interesting because before the war, they used to smuggle goods, but the Germans sucked all the goods out of France during the war. So there were no goods to smuggle to south to the Spaniards. So if you can't smuggle goods, then you smuggle people. And thus the smugglers of the Pyrenees became the great saviors of Jews and Allied airmen and Allied soldiers in the early part of the war. Rather like in the Alps, you had similar people smugglers taking people to safety. And it was a dangerous job. If you were caught smuggling Jews, you would get sent to a concentration camp. And 2 people from Henri's village did, in fact, get caught and died in a work camp. Last slide, Ninette's wedding. I include Ninette's wedding for a couple of reasons. First of all, the synagogue that she was where the ceremony took place was the Rue Copernic synagogue, and there you can see it bombed in 1941 and restored as it looks today, and it would have looked for Ninette's wedding. But if we think about this, the guest list, the people who attended, her wedding had a fascinating socio-political significance. The dress was made by Balmain, and Balmain's chief executive was Ginette Spanier, who Ninette would sit and chat with about she was a Jewess, her wartime experiences in the resistance, and as the dress was being made. The reception was held at Jean Riems's home, 1940s soldier, then a resistance, then a Free French officer. And the other guests included Pierre-Louis Dreyfus, Gilles Lovenbach, Jacques Raphael Legge, Didier Hilbrand, Simon Stoloff. And they were all Jews who, in their own way, contributed to the Free French and resistance war effort. So the idea, this terrible canard of Jews being led like lambs to the slaughter, well, the fact is that if you look at the Jewish contribution to the war effort, it was hugely outsized. In the Free French, you have René Cassin, Pierre Mendès France, future Prime Minister of France, Roman Gary, the novelist, François Jacob, Nobel Prize winner, Joseph Kessel, the great writer. In the domestic resistance, you have Jean-Pierre Lévy, founder of one of the resistance groups. You have the historian Marc Bloch. You have Raymond Aubrac, who was born Raymond Samuel, leader of another resistance group. And of the resistance fighters shot by the Germans at Mont Valérien, 17% of those were Jews, as opposed to just 3% of the population. And of the 300 Algerian Frenchmen who assisted the Anglo-American landings in November 1942 in Algeria, 90% of the Algerian Frenchmen who joined the landings and assisted them were Jews. Anyway, that is the end of my journey through 1940s France and my Jewish story of survival in that period.
Thank you so much, John, for that fascinating overview of your work. There's far more in the book, and I would heartily recommend the book. It's a very exciting and riveting story with lots more detail within it. If you have questions for John, we've got a few minutes, so please type them into the Q&A now, and we'll talk about them. John, when you wrote this book, how much did you know at the outset, and how much did you have to research, and what did that research look like?
I knew very, very little indeed. I mean, I knew about the British contribution in the Second World War. I knew about obviously about my father's prisoner of war experiences. But of Vichy France, I knew very, very little, other than having seen the classic films, etc. And if you were to go downstairs to our conservatory, you would see a bookcase full of literally hundreds of books that I devoured in this journey, because I really wanted to back up everything that Ninette said with, to the degree that I could, with other sources. be they first-hand sources, secondary sources, documents, conversations, etc. Because I think it's very, very important, particularly in the face of Holocaust denial, that you get things accurate, or as accurate as you possibly can. So lots and lots of research is the answer.
But mainly from books, or were there archives you visited and
Okay. Books, secondary books, but also first-hand memoirs, but also Les Archives Nationales are an extraordinary treasure trove of documents, because all the documents of the French expropriation of Jewish businesses and family homes, including Ninette's family's businesses, Ninette's family's homes, they are in the Archives Nationales. And thus you can see, alongside the Germans, you can see all the names of French Gentiles who participated in this feeding frenzy to grab hold of Jewish homes and Jewish businesses.
what was there anything you found particularly surprising, and anything you discovered that you would say was particularly unexpected?
What I found surprising, what was new to me, was the level, well, paradoxically, two things. One, the level of active participation by the French Gentiles in the expropriation and attempted extermination of the Jews.
Mm.
That was one horrific thing to find. On the other side of the coin, and this is very important too, the role of Gentile rescue is very, very important indeed. These wonderful anarchistic smugglers of the Pyrenees or the Alps helping Jews to safety in Switzerland or in Spain, on the one hand, but also Christian rescue. I mentioned Bishop Raymond of Nice. The French Calvinists, the Huguenots, had experienced terrible persecution in the past. And lo and behold, on a per capita basis, French Calvinists were far more actively involved in rescue, hiding Jews, helping them to safety, than the general population. But at a certain point, the French Catholic hierarchy, a number of them stood up and were counted and got involved in speaking out against persecution, and then also actively saving and rescuing and hiding Jews. So Ninette's cousin, Denise, was hidden by the Jesuits. The Jesuits were quite seriously involved in rescue in Paris during the war. And various other religious groups were involved in rescue. So it's, on the one hand, horrible, ugly feeding frenzy by a lot of French Gentiles, lawyers, property surveyors, bureaucrats, you name it, businessmen, happily involved in this feeding frenzy on the one hand. On the other hand, a complex mixture of people involved in rescue as well.
Knowing Ninette as you did, what do you think she would make of the interest in her story now?
I think she would be very happy. The first thing that she said to me, I think she said, "I'm a survivor." You know, she was very she was conscious that she was a survivor. She donated her papers to the Wiener Library. She was heavily involved as a financial contributor to Gerald's CST. She and her her and David had been involved illicitly in the less law-abiding antecedents to the CST before the CST was founded. So she, I think, would be pleased that her story has been written. My great sadness, Jonathan, my great sadness is that she died before I completed the book. I would have loved to have had her sitting here next to me as we went through this talk, and that you hearing directly from her about her wartime experiences, her silver spoon childhood, the debt of gratitude that she owed her father for having saved the family. So it would have been lovely had she been here.
The book's beautifully written, and along with the very meticulous research, you tell the story with great empathy. But your books are pretty infrequent. So is there another one in the pipeline, and when might we see it?
At the moment, Jonathan, I mean, I've got a program of, sort of talking about the book to people. In 2 weeks' time, I'm off to America for the US publication of the book. So if anyone's got American friends, it comes out through Pegasus Books on September 2nd. Pardon the advert, the plug. And so we're off to America. We're off to New York to talk to people about the book. And then the paperback comes out in January. But there are various other projects in the works. But let me give birth to them first before.
Well, we'd love to have you back, should anything relevant be published. This book is well worth a read. You'll find it in good bookshops and on Amazon. And to say thank you, I'll send you a book of some of my photographs, which I do hope you'll enjoy looking through. Now, this is the last Millim of the summer. We'll be back in the autumn with a full programme. So to find out about that, visit millim.org.uk. And make sure you sign up to our newsletter so you are first to hear about anything we're doing. All of our online events are free, but you can make a donation. There's a link in the chat, and you'll also find it on our website. So it remains for me to thank our guest, John Jay, once again. Thank you, John. We got through it. No technical hitches. And looking forward to seeing you all again next time. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.